All right, so I thought what I would do, given the climate and having to go back into lockdown, I thought it was appropriate to talk to everyone about, you know, coping with mental health in small businesses. Everyone has their own business. And there's a lot of talk about, so I'm not delving into mental health from a personal perspective in your own private life. It crosses over, and where the synergy here is with what Anna does, it kind of ties into tapping into that side of it post what I'm talking about. I'm focusing more on how you cope as a small business from an employer perspective and how you help your employees deal with it and what your work health and safety obligations are as an employer. And during this pandemic, how do you actually deal with all of these things? Right, that's not going to work right. The arrows don't work, sorry. I'm just trying to work through this. So when you look at it, some of the daily quarantine questions that you come up with that you can ask yourself just to help deal with these are, what am I grateful for today? Who am I checking in on or connecting with? What expectations of normal am I letting go of today? So what would you normally have done outside of quarantine? And when I prepared this, it was Sunday last week, so I kind of thought we might go back into lockdown, but I wasn't expecting it to be right now when I was doing the presentation. And are you getting outside? So if you live in a house and you have the opportunity of going into a garden, if you live in a flat, that creates its own challenges. Hopefully you've got a balcony that you can get out to. How are you moving? And what beauty are you creating? And that could be anything. It could be baking, it could be cooking, it could be, you know, doing something that makes you happy. It could be knitting or crocheting or doing woodwork, something that takes your mind off your daily stresses. And it's essential. It is really, really important when you are looking at it from a work perspective. Everyone's working from home. How do you separate your work life and your home life and have that separation? And those are some of the things that I'm going to go through as we go through the next few slides. So I just need to move my people's screens because they're blocking here. So when you look at it, how do you create a mentally healthy small business? How do you look after your own mental health and well-being in response to COVID-19? And how do I look after my employees' mental health? And when you look at it, mental health and mental health and well-being is every employer's obligation in the workplace. And you have an obligation as an employer to look after your employees' mental well-being. And that's from a workplace health and safety perspective. Everyone's trying to focus on getting your businesses through this challenging period and looking after your families and staff. And you forget about prioritizing your own mental health. It's a good idea to create a mental health plan, and that makes sure that you have the right strategies in place to look after your own well-being. Because if you don't look after yourself first, you can't provide the right level of support for those around you. So when you're looking after your staff and those that look up to you for guidance as to what do we do next in the workplace, if you haven't looked after yourself, chances are that the behavior that you exhibit, they're going to pick up on that. So if you are stressing about COVID-19, you're stressing about those bills that you have to pay, you're stressing about the wages you have to pay and everything else that comes with it, that behavior and what you exhibit is going to transfer, and they're going to pick all of that up, no matter how much you try and hide it. So you do have to look after your own well-being first in order to look after your employees and your family around you. And your family might be your employees, you know, if you're in a family-run business. So it's important to think about that. And you might only have one staff member, you might have a couple. It just depends how many you employ. The Victorian Small Business Commission, they've developed some really helpful tips and guidelines with Beyond Blue to create mental health plans. And I'll circulate this slide because I've got the resources. You just click on that and it'll go straight to the guides that you can go into. You don't have to kind of write these down. So the mental health plan resource I've got here, when you click on that, it'll go straight into what that guide is. And we've only got 10 minutes here, so I'm not going to open all of them up, but I'll share this with everyone. So what does mental health, my chest just goes into spasms a little bit. What does mental health in the workplace mean for you and your employees? So I'm going to look at the first one is as a business owner. And some of these things Anna touched in her intro, because this is an area from when you look after yourself. Reach out to Anna if you have any areas that you don't know what to do. This is great about being in a group like this, where you've got someone with Anna's expertise. She can guide you through from a personal level as well. When you're looking after your own mental health, your business is growing. And some of you have had to pivot and go to online processes if you only did face-to-face things. But you have to make time for exercise every day. And some people don't like exercise. So find something that you really enjoy. And it might be, 5 minutes in front of the TV doing leg raises, doing a bit of yoga. Take a couple of yoga exercises that just help relax who you are, get your kids involved, get your partner involved. That's what I've started doing with my husband, just to get him involved in doing something rather than sitting in front of the couch when he gets home from work. How do you help each other de-stress each day, but find something that you enjoy? Be mindful. You've got a lot of negative thoughts that go through your head during this time in lockdown as well. It's so easy to kind of, sink into a negative mindset. The media is full of it. There is so much negativity going on at the moment. Find something positive. Find something that you're grateful for. There will be 3 things that you can find at the beginning and end of each day that you are grateful for. You will have your health. You've got your family's health around you. You've done something positive. You've been out and you've got a cup of coffee at your local place. And you know what? You've supported their business. That's something positive. You've got a takeaway coffee, or you've taken your dog for a walk or something. There will be something that you could find that takes away some negative thoughts. So have a think about what that means for you. Another way that you could do it, if you think, well, I don't like mindfulness, it's not for me. You need to just clear your mind of the clutter that's there, or you're going to continue to be in a negative frame of mind. You can't help your employees if you operate in that mindset. So think about the people around you in a business set that you are meant to be looking out for, and their mental health as well. It's very important to create work-life boundaries, and working from home means you have to learn to switch off. So as business owners, you often have your place of work is home. So not everyone has a separate business workplace. So you work from home. Make sure that you can separate that. And if necessary, come 5 o'clock, you're going to the kitchen, or you're going to go and do something. If you have to, change your clothes. Do something that kind of shakes you out of that work mode and switches you from work to family. And switch your phone off if you can. Try and separate your business and home life. Connect with others. It's very important. You're not in this alone during the COVID situation. Everyone is impacted. Other business owners are in the same situation. Some will be in different degrees. So just remember to reach out to other people, because often we forget and you go into a little cocoon and that's when you become isolated. Things you need to look out for as a business owner are physical changes in your behavior. It could be eating habits. It could just be being on your own. You're not thinking clearly. The feelings of being sad or anxious on a regular basis. The occasional things, that's not a regular change. So it has to be regular changes to your behavior patterns. Isolating yourself and disconnecting from others out of choice, not because we're forced to, like we are in lockdown. And feeling of being overwhelmed the whole time. Whatever factors contribute to being mentally healthy condition, workplace has a very key vital role, and being flexible, providing support and creating an environment where everyone feels comfortable raising concerns and reaching out when they need it. Don't forget that your employees need to have an environment where they can raise their voice, and if they're feeling nervous or anxious about the COVID situation, make sure that you allow them the opportunity to speak out. And if you don't talk about it, they're not going to be comfortable talking about it. So talk to them about how you're feeling. Make sure that you let them know that you feel vulnerable as well. It doesn't mean putting it all out there, but let them know that you are feeling a bit nervous about the situation. Look, it's not going away. So for your staff, make sure that you create conversation points around mental health in the workplace and encourage your staff to talk openly about mental health strategies. Remind them to take breaks. If they're working from home and you're still working remotely, if you're not in a business where you need everyone in the office, make sure that you encourage them to take those breaks. Often staff that work from home end up working non-stop, or you get staff that can't work from home. They don't know how to actually balance their working life at home. Help them through that process. Give them a structured day or give them guidelines on how to work from home. If you've got staff in the office, because that's how you have to work, make sure that you've got brochures around the breakout areas about mental health availability and encourage them to talk to each other. Make sure that there is support around the different areas that you have got with Are You OK campaigns. Be work safe smart. Know your legal obligations as an employer and as a business owner, because work-related stress impacts mental health significantly. And what are your legal implications around work-safe stress? So obligations as an employer, work health safety laws cover risks to psychological health. And this is where it really impacts you. If you don't take notice of this, every employer has to take steps to what's reasonably practicable as far as WorkSafe goes to reduce or eliminate psychological risks to your workers or to your employees. Consult with your staff. Make sure you understand what those risks are. It's unprecedented times, we know that. But you have to know what your work health and safety duties are and how you can practically meet them. So get advice. WorkSafe Victoria are amazing if you talk to them. They're not out to kind of put penalties on employers unnecessarily, and they're really helpful when you need it. There are also some great OHS consultants out there who will guide you through that minefield when you need some help around these areas. As an employer, make sure that you understand what psychological injury is and what are psychological hazards. And these hazards are anything from physical, mental, and emotional reactions, and it could be a perceived demand. So employees might find that they're not coping because their ability to do what's required is beyond what they perceive to be their physical. They just can't do it. And stress itself is not the injury, but they can put in a stress claim because they feel they're not coping. And the stress claims are the hardest ones to work through if there's a WorkCover claim. It doesn't mean it's not going to stop it from going through, but they're really hard to challenge. And so COVID-19 introduces a range of psychological hazards in the workplace at a time when there's other non-related psychological risks, and you've got uncertain job future, social isolation, all of that happens. And all I want to do is make sure that as business owners, you're aware of what those psychological injuries can be from a workplace health and safety perspective. So by making sure that you have those mental health and safety awareness, that it just makes it really, really clear. Coping mechanisms are pushed to their limits at the moment. So as an employer, when you've got WHS obligations, check in on your employees to reduce that work-related stress factor. By reducing that, you reduce the need for an employee to say, I'm done, I can't cope with this, I'm going to put in a stress claim. So communication is really, really key with your employees. Talk to them. So I've just listed some of the psychological hazards which have come from COVID-19. And these are exposure to physical hazards and poor environment conditions, concern about COVID-19 at workplace, poor management of work health and safety risks, lack of equipment. Some businesses might need to provide PPE like masks, depending on what close contact they have with clients or customers, etc. Exposure to poor conditions. It's amazing how some of your employees will complain about heat or cold, and with COVID-19, the impact of how the virus can actually be circulated within an air-conditioned environment. So it's keeping windows open, it's allowing fresh air to come in. There's a lot of different things that you need to consider when staff come back to work or if they are already in a work environment. The exposure to violence and aggression, so whether they're exposed to that in a work-related environment, but also your staff might be working from home and be exposed to domestic violence. So you don't know what kind of stresses they're going through. They might have a serious death or an illness of someone who's had COVID-19, the self-isolation as a result of suspected workplace exposure. There's a number of those things there which I've kind of listed, and poor workplace relations. So you might find that the communication has decreased because of isolation. And that's something that you have to be really, really careful of. Make sure that you keep constant communication with your employees and your staff if you are working remotely. Daily contact with them, it's a tough one, you know, working remotely. Some are okay with it, and some just can't cope with it. They need that constant communication or that interaction with everyone. So it is very much about, you know, I put the slide in here. Watch out for your mates, ask them if they're okay, make sure that you check in with them, or get one of their colleagues to check in with them regularly, who they have a really good, relationship with. So I've listed some tips here for managing stress from COVID, and it is about regularly asking if they're okay, checking in on how they're going, and do it in your way. Do it in a way that's natural for you and doesn't come across as just superficial. So it has to be really warm and genuine. And ask employees if they're distressed about the challenging conditions. Everyone's going through it. You need to make sure that you appear vulnerable as well to the fact that you are not immune to what's going on. Make sure that you stay informed with information from official sources, and that you regularly communicate this and share this with your employees as well. Support innovation to address the psychosocial risks where you can that are reasonable. So if staff come up with ideas on how they can manage different working arrangements where it's flexible or whatever, take those into consideration. And doesn't mean you have to put everything into place, but listen to them, make sure that they feel that they're part of the consultation process. And make sure that you inform employees of their entitlements. If they become unfit for work or they have care and responsibilities, make sure you know what their rights are so that you can communicate to them, rather than being on the back foot and have your employees tell you what they can or can't do, because they might have something off the website, but it may not be the full situation, and you don't want to be caught unawares of what you can and can't do with your employees. Make sure that you know the rights of your employees under work health and safety laws. All of that kind of minimizes your mental health. As a business owner, you can stress about things that you don't need to actually stress about. I've got a client at the moment who's based in Townsville, for instance, you know, and she's called me in an absolute panic about an employee she's got now during COVID. And just one phone call to me, and I've said to her, there's nothing to worry about. These are the steps we'll take. You know what? She spent 2 days or a whole week stressing over something that's actually completely minor. It's easily solved, but she didn't have the information or the workplace information to actually deal with it because she's panicked about COVID. And it's a simple thing of just picking up the phone and calling someone who actually understands. And it could be any HR consultant. It could be anyone who has that valid information. But as a business owner, you are caught up in the moment and the stress of COVID that you are not thinking sensibly. And example, this is purely a probation process. This is an employee who has a pre-existing medical condition and who potentially could harm young kids in a daycare centre because she's not able to do the inherent requirements of her role. And this is a small employer of 15 people. So you find that you start to stress about things and your mental health starts to get impacted and you can't think coherently, and it impacts your ability to think about how's this impacting the rest of my staff. So it has very real consequences further down for every employee that falls underneath you, and you have a responsibility to look after every one of them, not just one that is a slight issue. So in summary, everyone has a dual responsibility. So it comes down to the employee and the employer, but you've got to have, as Anna always says, a healthy body equals a healthy mind, and that's no different in the workplace. So as an employer, you have to look after yourself, but everyone has a role to play in making sure the work environment around you is safe and your risks are eliminated as far as reasonably practicable. Don't underestimate the impact of psychological health has on the workplace and the cost to the business if it's not addressed early enough. If things don't get addressed early enough and it becomes a case where it becomes a legal matter, it goes from me to, in some instances, Elizabeth might deal with them, or it might go to a different kind of lawyer, but it becomes a legal matter. And then the costs become exponential. It doesn't need to get there. So if you can deal with it from early, and you can't afford not to get it right for both yourself and your employees. And from a mental health perspective, mental ill health in the workplace doesn't have to get there. So I do a lot of work with IHR Australia, which is why I've included a slide that they do, and some signs that you can look for when a team member might be experiencing mental health. And the manager, what a manager should do, and that manager side is as relevant as if you are a business owner. And it really is relevant around looking out for those signs, making sure that you're aware of what's going on around you, and don't be an ostrich and put your head in the sand, because there are consequences to not getting it right from a work health and safety perspective. And it's damaging, it has psychological damaging effects that can be irreversible, which is not, it doesn't have to be. So I've got some useful resources for everyone around, the links are there for Heads Up, WorkSafe Victoria's Work Well Toolkit, Business in Mind. The Ripple Effect is really an initiative for rural communities that seek to address suicide in rural areas. I thought I'd include it for anyone who has any work or does anything in the rural areas, and then obviously Beyond Blue. And then that's the end. I've just kind of added a quote in there as well. And then that's it. So I'm open to any questions.
Thank you, Sharon. That's fantastic. Anyone have any questions?
Yep. Go, Sarah.
Go for it.
Sharon, I'm just wondering, is there any obligation for me as an employer to have a written record of what we're doing around these efforts?
Look, it's not a bad thing to actually document some of the things that you do. It just comes as a safeguard for you. Should anything happen, you actually can demonstrate that you've done some of these things. So whether you are having regular communication sessions, you will have your email trail. So if you are emailing things out to your staff, you'll have an email trail. If you have things that are posted up around the offices, you will have a record of that because you have your posters put up. If you do have anything that you are talking to them, you can have like a little toolbox talk checklist, and just have a little file that has mental health in the workplace, and just keep it electronically if you want. You don't have to keep hard copies, but it's not a bad idea to keep them documented if you ever need to go back to it. So if you did get a WorkCover claim, you can demonstrate that you've taken these steps to ensure the work health and safety side of it as a backup if you did get a stress claim.
Thank you.
Yep, I've got a quick question. You mentioned transfer of COVID through air conditioning. Is that a real issue?
So what they've proven and I'm going to get the country wrong, so I just don't hold me to this. You can Google search it. One of the Asian countries, and I think it was Japan, or it's one of those countries, they actually proved that one of the main spreaders of one of the key contacts, there was a person in a restaurant who actually spread it to 9 different people in that restaurant through the air conditioning system. So he was in the middle of the restaurant, and it had the aircon this side and a vent this side, and they actually proved that the particles actually spread from the aircon going that way, the vent was coming this way, and they proved that the particles spread around by the test they did on the actual virus and who actually got that virus in that restaurant. So they recommend that if you are in, and it was on the news just recently as well, they do recommend that you have the windows open, and they're recommending that in some of the, it was on something I've read recently, and it was in the one of the medical things, that if you keep the windows open for fresh air to come in, and you get your air conditioning people to check vents and stuff, because it will circulate in the air conditioning system if there is a super spreader, or if there is someone who has COVID, and it goes into air conditioning vent, because the particles will get in there. So you just need to check with whoever does your air conditioning in the system, especially in apartments. It was on the news last night or the night before.
So how does a employer control a worker's home with the air conditioning,
okay,
for
so
example, and heating?
you can't control that workplace because it's one of those things. It's the same way you've got the manslaughter laws. You can't control anything that's outside of the employer's office environment. You can't control that workplace. You can only do what's reasonably practicable. And those are the steps that an employer has to just demonstrate that they've done from a reasonably practicable perspective. And so long as, if it's in their home, you can't control that from that perspective. So you can only give them those steps from a wellness perspective to mitigate it. But if it's in their home, you can't control that. You can only do it from the environment, in the office environment where they are.
So what steps does an employer have to have when people are coming into the office? I heard the other day that if hypothetically say my office, I have candidates or clients coming in, that yes, I do have certain protocols set, but if an employee comes in and they contract COVID, I have to prove that they didn't contracted from within my office, or
no, you don't.
Okay.
So no, you don't have to prove that at all.
What's the responsibility on us then?
No, so you don't have to do that at all. So from the mental health side of things as well, you will find that all the staff will start to stress and everything else like that. But what you do is WorkSafe Australia have got some really good return to work plans that every employer has to adhere to anyway. And you put a checklist together. If you go to WorkSafe Australia, there's a COVID safe plan. It's like a checklist that you do for employers that have staff returning to work. And there is no way that you can prove a staff member got it from work, because when they've got a check, you've got to do a deep clean for 12. I think it's you've got to do a deep clean for 24 hours or 12, and your staff have to go home, and there's a process that you have to go through when you notify the health officers, and it just means that anyone who's come into close contact has to self-isolate. But if you were not in close contact with him, there is no expectation for you to self-isolate.
Do we have to do a deep clean or some sort of massive clean before you open in anticipation of having people back in the office? No.
Only if you've had a COVID case. If you have
okay.
Only if you had a COVID case.
Thank you.
Okay.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, I was just going to ask a question. So I've had situations, because I've been employing people for about 27 years, and I've had situations where, a staff member might be going through something that's external to work, for example, a breakup or some issue like that.
Yeah.
And you can check in with them and you can see maybe that they're struggling in that, but like, different people have different, I guess, degrees of openness about what they're prepared to share. And I have often felt a bit like you don't want to pry because it's their personal life, but you can see clearly that they're struggling. What would you recommend in those sorts of cases?
So in those situations, Elizabeth, I would just recommend that you let them know that you are there. They're obviously not at work. They've got time off. So it's good to check in with them and just make sure that they're okay. You can't force them to talk to you. But you can just let them know that you are there as an employer and you are concerned for their well-being. If there's anything that you can do, you can offer your support. And most small businesses don't have an EAP, an employee assistance program, because they are quite costly. But what you can do is just make sure that you offer them. Make sure that you've got the websites or you've got the contact points for Beyond Blue and a couple of the other support groups out there. And all you can do is just let them know that as an employee you care for them and that you are there for them. And if they ever want to talk, you're more than happy to kind of listen to them, and give them the numbers for the support groups, and that they don't have to go alone. There's nothing else you can do.
Where do you get these posters that you were mentioning?
Okay, so you can get on the links that I've got. Both I'll send my slide to the group. Both Are You OK, Beyond Blue and Headspace, they've all got some really good posters. When you contact them, they can actually send, or you might be able to download them off, I can't remember offhand. I used to do that when I was in my corporate role. We often would look at stuff that didn't cost anything, and they've got some really great resources that you can utilize as small businesses, that you can put the posters up. If you need someone to talk to, please contact us. So you can absolutely refer your staff to them. And staff don't always want to talk to their employer, but so long as they know that the employer is concerned about their welfare and you've demonstrated that, beyond that, you can't push it. Yeah. But what you can do is if you get any sense that any of your employees might be suicidal, and if you get any of that, you do absolutely have a duty of care to say to them, are you going to self-harm? And you can absolutely ask that question. As a mental health first aider, that's one of the things that you are taught, is you have to come out openly and ask them that question. You are not there to counsel them or to try and stop them, but if you get any inclination that they're going to self-harm, you have to come out and ask them that question, and you have to refer them to a GP. So you do need to do that. So you kind of have to gauge where they're at, and if there's no evidence that they're going to do that, just refer them to one of the support groups.
I guess the other issue is that WorkCover claims can be quite expensive for an employer, and mental health is one of those very grey areas. And I've certainly seen employers who have had situations where they've had a stress leave claim, and it's really nothing to do with work. It's the person's personal life is just in a complete shambles, or they might have had pre-existing mental health issues. How do you protect yourself as an employer in those circumstances?
The only thing you can do is make sure that you have always kept up communication with your employee, and that your side is as good as it can be, because then when it goes to a WorkCover claim, you can actually object and there's no grounding for it, and you can get it thrown out. So if everything is there, because stress claims are really hard to prove, but if you've got everything on the employer's side actually lines up, I have had stress claims thrown out because of that. But if the employer's side is not squeaky clean, there's just a small little sliver of doubt, it will go through. So they have to make sure that their performance review processes are right, that there is no bullying and harassment in the organisation, that the communication is there, and that everything lines up. You will get the stress claim thrown out.
Fantastic. You have to wrap it up there because we've got the end of the meeting stuff to get to, but that's been amazing, Sharon. Your I guess, information, everything. With your presentation, can you send it through to me, because clearly there's a bunch of links I need to share when
I'll just email it to you.
Yeah, email it to me outside this meeting, and then I'll ensure that those links are shared with everyone and they can review it, because very topical, very on point, and there was a lot of information there that's very useful. So thank you again for what you did today. Really appreciate it.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Sharon. That was fantastic, everything that Chris said. And I think something that everyone needs to hear. So even the questions that came through is supportive for everyone. Thank you so much.